Alright, so I've come to realize that teaching this subject is a lot more complicated when trying to teach multiple people how to do it at the same time, so I thought that making a proper video about shuffling would be a lot better. That being said, I've never made this video in the months that I've had time to think about it. Of course, I wanted to make it, but I didn't have any incentive to make it. However, now that ArshyTV requested a video like this, I can't exactly deny it. Plus, the idea to include my hand movements and keyboard movements wasn't his, but he did indeed push me to find a way to include these two aspects, so I guess most of the credit would go to him for pushing me to make this video. So, this video will be a short video about shuffling. You know, the thing that you see good players doing to avoid getting shot while simultaneously medkit spamming. This video will be unlisted on YouTube though, because it's more of a tutorial that I wanted to make specifically for L-Way and B-Way members, which was the original idea. So, if you do happen to see this video outside of a tutorial setting, such as training, make sure to save the link for future reference. And of course, you can share this with whomever you want. There was also a slight difficulty in getting my webcam to sync up with my in-game movements, since there was a slight delay. Don't worry though, my hand movement should be perfectly synced with my in-game movements, so you'll know exactly what I'm doing. Thanks, editing. Anyway, looks like it's time to get started. For as short of a video as it is, let's get started about talking about technique. This is the very basic technique of a shuffle where you're holding Shift and W, moving forward in a side-to-side motion. This shouldn't be too hard to do, although this is the very basic form of shuffling that leads into other shuffling techniques. I'll talk about an easy way to practice this later because getting down the basic technique is crucial, as we will build the other shuffles you'll see in this video off of this movement, and you'll get to see how tight your pattern should be limited to. So, for now, don't worry about the distance between your movements. You should be able to notice that I'm moving almost 180 degrees back and forth. This is what forms the snake pattern of most shuffles and is how you're going to do it as well. It's not quite 180 degrees as you'll notice, but it's close. The purpose of the shuffle is to move to cover and to take up as much time from your opponent as possible, so you don't exactly want to move in the same spot for too long, which is why it's not a full 180 degree turn. Getting to cover should be your number one objective when performing the shuffle, although if you know you are going to die, you can try to get as many people to aim at you as possible so that your other teammates can have an easier time taking out opponents. Okay, moving on to the first technique which most people use. I say most people because I've noticed this is one of the most common and easy shuffles to do as well as the one I was taught. I don't know if this is the most common for a fact, but it should still hold that this shuffle is a very common one and easy to perform. Notice what keys I'm pressing and how and where I press them. When I move to the right, I'm pressing my D key. Then, when I switch to the left, I'm holding my A key. This is probably more well known as the AD shuffle, normal shuffle, or as I said earlier, common shuffle. The reason you use your A and D keys is to make a sharper, faster turn without having to move your mouse as much to get the same sideways movement. Again, when I go to the right, I press D. When I go to the left, I press A. If it's hard to pay attention to my movements, don't be afraid to slow down the footage and study it. This is the second technique. This is probably the second most common, and again I say probably because I can't say for certain that this is the second most common for a fact. I can, however, say that this is the opposite of the first technique and slightly harder to do. So, in my opinion, that would make it the second most common since it's a slight deviation of the first technique. The thing to point out with this technique is the way I press A and D. When I say this is the opposite of the first technique, it's because you switch around where you press A and D. So, when I'm moving to the right, I press A. When I move to the left, I press D. I currently don't know the name of the shuffle, but you can feel free to make a name for it. You might be asking why this is used, even though it's the opposite of the first, and the answer to that is because of the way animations work in PlanetSide 2. Shuffling is a way to break animations, or put more simply, making it so that the way your character model is displayed isn't matched up to your actual movements. You've probably learned by now that what you see on your screen isn't exactly what your opponent sees on theirs, and a properly done shuffle is another example of this. The second technique doesn't break animations better than the first technique, nor vice versa. It's all about how the user uses these shuffles that will make the difference, not the techniques themselves. Now that you know the two basic techniques, let's talk about how to practice them. The way that I like to have people practice shuffling is to go to a doorway that looks like the one shown here. The one I'm using can be found nearly everywhere, including the warp gates, which is where I'm doing this demonstration. The reason I prefer to use these doorways like this, or even markers on the ground with the same spacing, is to keep track of how far apart your direction switching is. You can also think of it as the time between switching directions. As you've seen so far, you don't just move in one direction forever. You have to continuously switch directions to confuse your opponent, which is why it's called a shuffle. That distance, or time interval, that you switch directions at is very important to make sure that you confuse whoever is aiming at you. That's why you should use a marker or limiter such as lines on the ground or a doorway, which I'm showing here. From my own personal experience, this is the average distance that your shuffles should be. Simply put, when you're shuffling in the doorway, switch directions once you hit the side of the door frame, one side to the other. Switch, 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 switch. As I said earlier, you can think of this as the reference of distance or time between switching directions. Practicing like this in the doorway is the only time you will swing a full 180 degrees when shuffling. Other places for practicing shuffling that use lines or references on the ground are good for practicing shuffling in a forwards direction. Make sure to have someone watch you to be sure you are doing this correctly. A bad shuffle can lead to a lot of frustration. That concludes this tutorial video. If you have any questions about this video, be sure to ask a mentor or coach that is well informed on the subject. Don't forget, there are other shuffles that you might run into that don't fit these two shuffles shown here. You can make your own shuffle as long as it works, but all shuffles have things in common with the shuffles shown here. Remember, the objective of shuffling is to render your opponent's aim near useless. This means that you need to randomize your movement or else it'll be easy to track. Don't forget that. Thanks again to RCTV for giving me the motivation to make this video. Make sure to share this video with anyone who wants to see what shuffling looks like from a first-person point of view, and be sure to practice this on live. Experience is a better coach than a guy telling you how to do something on YouTube. Thanks for watching, and have a great day on Araxis. I will see you on the battlefield.